Welcome to Decades of Heistery, where we cover safecrackers and bank heists from 1926 up until U.S. involvement in World War II. All right, it is time to reunite the gang or bring the band back together one more time. With friends we met back in 1926, it looks like they're going to face their reckoning here in 1927. First up will be Wilfred Bonnan. We first met Wilfred Bonnan through the Alaska Daily Empire back in May of 1926. We linked him to the Royal Bank of Canada heist in Winnipeg. That's when the robber, Bonnan, shot at a teller, missed, but inadvertently hit an 18-year-old bank employee named Maurice Garvey. He was also called Maurice Davy in other editions. The robber fled with $2,000, but he was pursued and a firefight ensued shortly thereafter, during which the robber shot Winnipeg detective and law enforcement legend George Smith, along with a rooming house proprietor named Robert Siegel. Bonnan was wounded badly in the chest and shoulder in the exchange. The Bismarck Tribune and the Evening Star, both dated January 25, 1927, provided the same Associated Press update, but it was couched in a strange context. The story was titled "Canada's Official Hangman to Retire and Write Memoirs." We're talking about Arthur Ellis, who was going to retire after having performed over 400 executions. However, Ellis had one execution to go. It was set for January 26th, that would be the next day, when he was going to supervise the hanging of Wilfred Bonnan. Incidentally, Bonnan had been crippled in some manner during the shootout. I'm assuming his spinal cord was hit. He had to be carried to the gallows, which is a particularly gruesome image. The Sunday Star provided details on a William Germaine. We first met Germaine through the Washington Times back in a June 1926 episode. He'd been arrested, having been wanted in DeSoto, Missouri, in connection with the $9,000 heist of the Bank of DeSoto that occurred December 30, 1925. Germaine had been on the lam during that whole time. He'd been hunted in Chicago and in Florida, which are ideal spots for bootleggers, gangsters, bank robbers at the time, along with places like New Orleans and Hot Springs, Arkansas. Yet he was picked up for stealing automobile tires and accessories from a Massachusetts warehouse. He was noted, I think curiously, considering his crimes, as a, quote, dapper youth, end quote. It's currently December 2024, and we have another dapper youth who's in the news currently today, and that would be the one who allegedly assassinated the United Healthcare Insurance CEO. It's curious to see the parallels between the 1920s and the 2020s. So we do seem to become enamored with these people, good or bad, as long as the conditions are right, that they're attractive and that they're bright and that they're charming. It's a strange quirk of human nature. Nevertheless, Germaine at first told police that he wouldn't fight extradition, but apparently then he reneged on that. He claimed, in fact, that he'd been in Massachusetts at the time of the robbery. Well, the January 23rd, 1927 Sunday Star picks up the action. We learned that he'd been surrendered to Jefferson County, Missouri's deputy sheriff and was going to be put on trial. There's more to come on the seemingly never-ending saga of the dapper William Germaine. Well, speaking of sagas, after 10 different editions spread across 7 different prints, we learned of a twisted Texas tale. It involved, among other things, a secret marriage, a woman who scoped out at least 2 Texas banks, a farmer lecturing the bank robber, and a possible case of arson. nicknamed the Flapper Bandit, known as Rebecca Bradley, but whose secret marriage name was Rebecca Bradley Rogers. Incidentally, she worked as a stenographer for Texas Governor-elect Dan Moody. She wasn't a fool, having a Bachelor's of Arts in History from the University of Texas, and was even working her way towards a Master of Arts in History from the same university. Well, Rebecca's mother stood up in court and said, quote, "She is all I have, and I'm sure everything will come out all right, and the officers will find they have made a terrible mistake," end quote. That was minutes before her meeting her mysterious son-in-law, who happened to be a lawyer from Amarillo, Texas. This is some crazy stuff. In fact, her behavior led me to believe that she may have had psychological issues. And in the video we did on her story, I made the assumption that she would be treated differently in court due to her youthful age, which was noted in different papers anywhere between 16 and 22, and her sex. Well, this is actually really cool. We don't often get to see the perpetrators, but in this case, we actually get a rendering of Rebecca Bradley Rogers. And we're still looking forward to learning more of her fate. The producer's news from January 7, 1927 brought us a roundup of robberies in North Dakota. The story was titled, "Bandits Get $160,000 in North Dakota Banks in 1926. Well, we just happened to cover some of these heists starting in the fall of 1926 and then followed up in December in the Part 2 video. We started in September with a hefty heist in New Rockford, North Dakota, that netted $90,000. Our October episode introduced a Norris Forrest, known as the Lone Wolf, and it turned out that Norris, who was a bank robber, was already serving a term at the time of the New Rockford robbery and therefore was exonerated. Our November episode added a deadly bank job in Wheelock, North Dakota, during which H.N. Peterson, cashier, was shot and killed. And incidentally, no money was successfully stolen. A week after that robbery, it was believed that the same crew from Wheelock hit the Malta National Bank in Malta, Montana. After that heist, warrants were issued for 3 ex-convicts. And due to their violent propensity, the warrants were issued wanted dead or alive. Well, on a rampage, this same crew hit the county treasurer's office in Plentywood, Montana, threatening the same outcome as in Wheelock, meaning aggressive, violent gunplay. The county treasurer heist ended up leading to a swarm of bank officials, investigators, and the Burns detective agents swarming the whole town. Well, as it turned out, in a weird twist, citizens ended up gossiping and making suggestions, including accusing county officers of performing an inside job on that heist. Along the way, an S.C. Collins was arrested in conjunction with the Treasury heist and also possible connections to more of the area robberies. But somehow mysteriously, an unknown supporter or supporters hired a law firm to defend Collins. I conjectured at the time that perhaps this friend or friends had come into a sizable portion of cash recently. The subtitle for the roundup story was "Yeggs Robbed Many Banks in Flickertail State Last Year. All escaped but men who burglarized Davenport State Bank." Well, I confess I was not aware that North Dakota was called the Flickertail State, and further, I'm guessing a flickertail is a bird. So my second guess would be butterfly. Third long shot would be a plant, most likely a bird. Well, we didn't come across the Davenport robbery by name for 1926. The story tallied and traced the robbers' activities, noting that the first robbery was on June 26 and that 9 subsequent ones followed between then and December. So it was a flurry. A total of over $150,000 was stolen. Oh, and also there was approximately $300 worth of damage to banking fixtures. They noted in the story that all but one of the holdups was a daylight job and involved the threat of gunfire. Out of all those 10 robberies that occurred, only 3 individual robbers had been captured by year end. They were a man named Curry, which I assume is his surname, Malak Brandom, Malloq, and a Peter Stodolka. Curry, Brandom, and Stodolka were arrested for committing the July 1927 Davenport State Bank heist and were in prison, having blown most of the money at least. In fact, I think when they were captured, only $127 had been returned. The new Rockford heist crew was still free and on the lam, and so as of now, the new year, we are still looking for resolution for this story. Another heist that was noted was the only nighttime endeavor, which makes me think it was a different crew. This was the McGregor State Bank. It was safecrackers, also known as Yeggs, but perhaps they were amateurs at safecracking because they damaged the vaults, thereby causing that $300 worth of damage to banking fixtures. And they only netted $100. So we could be looking at one of 3 things. That was a one-time attempt by a new crew that tried to crack a safe, and they weren't very successful. It was a separate crew that we know nothing about, or it's our main crew and they decided to try a different tactic, and again, it wasn't very successful. Back in our April 1926 Part 2 episode, we covered a small story about an escaped convict who'd been captured. Lewis Hart Austin had been arrested in New Orleans, Louisiana on April 10, 1926. He'd been wanted as the leader of a bank robbery combine that had robbed an unnamed Utah bank, quote, several years ago, end quote, so 1923-ish. During that bank heist, a cashier was shot, and the crew escaped with $16,000. Allegedly, this Lewis Hart Austin had escaped from the Arkansas State Penitentiary way back in 1921, though he claimed his sentence had been commuted. As if a possible prison escape and bank robbery with gunshots wasn't enough, he was also implicated in the famous Hartselle, Alabama robbery, during which the entire town was held hostage, $66,000 was stolen, and the deputy sheriff was held captive by the robbers. Of course, we've run across 2 or 3 different crews that had been attributed to the Hartselle heist. For all I know, I'm wanted for the Hartselle heist. He'd even been acquitted of involvement in a bank robbery that took place in Canada. Lewis Hart Austin had been a busy man, but at least as of April 1926, he was under wraps. Right? Well, maybe not, as we turn to the Montgomery Advertiser's January 31, 1927 edition, titled Seeks to Identify 4 Alleged Bandits, and subtitled Milton McDuff Leaves Birmingham for New Orleans to Question Suspects. We ask, who is Milton McDuff? Well, he was the head of the Identification Bureau of the Birmingham Police Department. He was on his way to New Orleans to question 4 in connection with the robbery of the Security Trust and Savings Bank in North Birmingham that occurred last November. I'm not sure if last November meant just 2 months previous, November of 1926, or as I would think, last November of 1925. Well, here's a kicker. McDuff noted to the press that he would be able to personally identify them if they were the ones who'd robbed the bank. Why? Because, and probably to the great misfortune of the robbers, McDuff just happened to be in the bank at the time of the heist. He ended up being locked in with several other customers into the vault, unable to resist, at least in part due to a broken right hand. So who were the 4 suspects that McDuff was going to identify? They were John Dean, Frank Britt, Clarence Brooks, and Spencer Kelly. Now for an interesting angle. A Hart Austin, who'd been captured in Memphis, quote, several days ago, end quote, and was then being held in Jackson, Tennessee as a suspect in some Nashville area holdups, was believed to be a fifth member of the gang. Is Hart Austin the same as Lewis Hart Austin? Hart Austin had been traced from Birmingham, Alabama, to New Orleans, Louisiana, where he was supposedly employed, and then on to Memphis. Birmingham police were sending members to identify Hart Austin, as he was also a suspect in the $15,000 robbery that occurred recently at Tarrant City, Alabama. That last heist will be one of our main stories that will be coming up 2 weeks after the release of this video. We're going to have to see if Lewis Hart Austin and Hart Austin are in fact the same person. We'll also continue to track and trace the antics, misdeeds, and mayhem by all of the robbers noted above. Next up will be our quick hitters video, which will introduce some brand new robberies, fresh for the brand new year, January 1927. For now, I want to thank you for spending your time with Decades of History. Until next time.
Where somebody waits for me, sugar sweet, and so is she. Bye bye, blackbird.